Welcome to Just Asia, AHRC TV's weekly human rights program. These are the headlines. Racial slurs hurled at Hong Kong judge for sentencing police officer. Rohingya militants attack military truck in Rakhine and vowed to continue fighting for rights. 9 years later, no justice in Sri Lankan journalist murder. Activists fear abuse by Indonesia's new cybercrime agency. Prominent activists in Nepal arrested for contempt of court. India's top court says national anthem in cinemas is optional, not mandatory. 3 urgent appeals from Pakistan, Indonesia and Nepal. Welcome to AHRC TV's Just Asia. I am Divya Padmanabhan. This week, Just Asia begins with Hong Kong, where abusive remarks were heard last week at Principal Magistrate Bina Chainrai after she sentenced police officer Frankly Chu to 3 months in prison for hitting a pedestrian with a baton during the 2014 pro-democracy protests. Dozens of people gathered outside the court on January 3rd in support of Chu. They called Magistrate Chainrai a dog and made racial slurs about her. Furthermore, they said foreign judges were not welcome and that Chinese people should be tried by Chinese judges. In response, human rights lawyer Philip Dykes, legal scholar Johannes Chan and 4 other barristers made a statement saying that such racial undertones had no place in Hong Kong society. Any attacks on judges for reasons unconnected to their decision, irrespective of their nationality, sex or other personal attributes, are wholly unacceptable and must be strongly condemned, they said. The Progressive Lawyers Group also condemned the incident, calling it an attack on Hong Kong's judicial independence. Similar incidents took place last year when District Court Judge David Dufton jailed 7 police officers for 2 years for beating activist Cheung during the Occupy protest. Just Asia speaks to barrister Mr. Y.L. Cheung for more information.
Put it this way, Magistrate Bina Chainrai is a Hong Kong girl. She and her family have been in Hong Kong for a very long time. In fact, she is probably the 2nd or even the 3rd generation. So she's 100% local. And I don't believe many people realize that, especially those who held that racial abuse against her. Now, as far as the judicial independence is concerned, I don't believe that will affect our judicial independence because the judges are rather professional. They're very fair. But I mean, this kind of incident is most unfortunate and it's utterly unacceptable because by using racial abuse against a member of the judiciary, not only will that create some impact, it will also harm, the image of Hong Kong because this is an open, fair, and accessible city. Well, as we can see, it also happened in the 7 police officers' conviction because that case dealt with in the district court was decided by Judge Dufton, who is an Englishman. And after that conviction and sentence of the 7 police officers, again there was a pro-police rally, and I remember that in that rally there was not predominantly, but some boys against in connection to the race of the judge. So in other words, what happened this time upon Bina Chainrai is the 2nd time we have seen that, and I think that something must be done to stop that. Okay, now if you are talking about action taken by the judiciary against this, well, I can say that the judiciary will not do anything because the judiciary doesn't want to get involved. In this kind of incident, it's for the government, in particular the Secretary for Justice, who is the guardian of social justice, to stand up against this kind of abuse. You see, because if you can imagine, if the judiciary makes any voice against this kind of abuse, for example, what if these people are subsequently charged and brought to the court? Now, the judges will find themselves in a conflicting situation because on one hand, they condemn such action. On the other, they will be dealing with these people in court. Don't you think that there's a conflict of interest? Well, there's some voice about that. I don't believe that this will happen in any foreseeable future. Firstly, the high-ranking police up in the high rank of the police structure knows that this kind of legislative measures to protect them is unthinkable in the rule of law. Further, I don't believe at this stage the government will even start thinking of implementing any protective measures given to the police officer, because this is a rule of law city. Everybody must be equal. If you are giving a blank check or immunity to the police, that means it will sooner or later develop into impunity. That is very, very dangerous. Well, you see, the most outrageous thing that I can see recently is that when there's people, especially those police people coming out, surely I can expect that the police are behind that. Now, when they come out giving their support to the police, now, don't you think that the absurdity lies on the fact that these police officers, on 2 occasions, 7 police officers and their superintendents, they were prosecuted by the police. You see, this is the beginning of a criminal proceeding. When a suspect has a charge laid against him, it must be initiated by the police. Then the case will go to the Secretary for Justice, who will prosecute this person, and eventually the person will be in the hand of court. So you see, one is a charge being laid by the police, then prosecution proceeding will be taken up by the Secretary for Justice, and eventually it's dealt with by the court. Now these police supporters are putting the blame on the court, on the judges. Now, don't they understand that if the police believed that these police officers, were so innocent, then why charge them in the first place? Why can't they blame the police for charging them? Why can't they blame the Secretary for Justice for prosecuting them? But why put the blame purely on the judge? Now, this is ridiculous and this is outrageous.
Next, Burma's Rakhine State saw an ambush on a military truck last week, injuring 3 persons. According to the government, a military vehicle taking someone to a hospital was targeted by about 20 extremist Bengali terrorists with homemade mines and arms on Friday, January 5th. On Sunday, the Rohingya militant group AHRC posted a statement on Twitter confirming its involvement. The group said it has no other option but to combat Burmese state-sponsored terrorism against the Rohingya population. AHRC has carried out only sporadic attacks, but early on August 25th last year, it launched assaults on about 30 police and army posts, triggering a fierce military response. As a result, thousands of Rohingya died, while hundreds of thousands more fled to neighboring Bangladesh. Bangladesh and Burma have been working on a plan to repatriate some of the 650,000 refugees, but it is unclear on what terms they could be allowed to return and whether they would be resettled into camps. Burma views AHRC as an Islamic terrorist movement, justifying its exceptionally harsh response to the August attacks. Just Asia speaks to Adam Carroll, Burma Task Force Director for New York and UN programs for more information.
Plans were bilateral plans, and they excluded Rohingya from the negotiations, and they actually excluded the United Nations as well. So by having this deal, this repatriation deal, be so exclusionary, the whole plan is full of holes, and unfortunately it calls for repatriation starting January 22nd, which is really impossible because right now there is no guarantee for safety and there's no guarantee for any rights to be restored to the Rohingya. Also, it's absurd to consider repatriation organized by the same Burmese military that burned the villages, committed mass atrocities, and seized the land and harvested the rice and stole the cattle from the Rohingya. So this really seems like a very, very bad joke. And when I speak to diplomats at the United Nations, in public, they give some kind of polite support to this repatriation deal. But in private, they all say, we know it's not going to work. People don't have trust. They're afraid to go back, of course. Well, there was a recent attack by AHRC, but it was very small. It got a fair amount of international media attention, but only 3 Burmese military were injured. And when you think that there are really quite a few attacks going on in Burma as well as elsewhere that don't get any attention whatsoever, you have to wonder about the manufacture of the narrative. I think it's clear that the Myanmar government is very active in promoting their own propaganda, that Rohingya are somehow a threat. The AHRC group is one tiny militia, and when you compare it to the other ethnic militias in Burma, it's even more insignificant. The Arakan National Army, in fact, has killed hundreds of Burmese soldiers, but it's mainly a Buddhist army, and so no one is calling it a terrorist army, even though it's much more dangerous to Burma. So, we don't know what will happen now, except that, always the Burmese army comes back with disproportionate force, and we're waiting for that again. Myanmar government and military have conducted 5 different investigations. Military investigates itself. No one trusts the military for good reason, and therefore they don't get any information from the villages, and they conclude that there is no abuse and no problem at all. However, last week there was finally an admission by the Burmese military that their people were responsible for killing a number of Rohingya who were found in mass graves. This is the mass graves that are connected to the arrest of the 2 well-regarded Burmese journalists. However, they are calling these Rohingya that were killed Bengali terrorists, and obviously they are spinning this as somehow permitted action. So at least it's a tiny step towards some kind of responsibility, taking responsibility, but for the most part, Burmese military has shown itself unwilling and unable to investigate, and it really requires UN and other outside agencies to do that.
Moving to Sri Lanka, the family of slain journalist Lasantha Wickremetunga on Tuesday expressed disappointment at the lack of progress in his murder investigation. In a statement read by his daughter Meenal at Lasantha's graveside, his family said that 9 years after his death, justice has not been served. Lasantha was murdered in 2009 at a time when many other journalists were also killed with impunity. He was shot dead by unidentified gunmen on motorcycles on his way to work in Colombo. But 2 post-mortems were inconclusive. One found Lasantha to have died from gunshot injuries, while another said there was no evidence of bullet wounds. After his surprise win in the 2014 elections, the new President Maithripala Sirisena vowed to reform Sri Lanka's treatment of the media and to reopen the investigation into Lasantha's murder. And yet, there continues to be no progress in the investigation. In Indonesia, activists and civil society are worried that the newly established National Cyber and Encryption Agency, BSSN, will restrict freedom of expression and opinion on the internet and result in criminal action against critics of government policies. After its recent inauguration, chairperson of the BSSN, Mr. Jogo Setiadia, publicly stated that it needs more authority to arrest people committing cyber crimes such as circulating hoax news and information, circulating hate speeches on the social media, and so forth. Responsible for Indonesia's cyberspace, the BSSN was set up as a state institution under the supervision of the coordinating political, legal, and security affairs minister. The agency is to cooperate with the State Intelligence Agency (BIN) and the Communication and Information Ministry, as well as the National Police, in managing those who spread fake news and hoaxes. While cybercrimes are a serious issue in Indonesia, they should be dealt with in accordance to human rights standards. Activists are therefore calling for the government to develop a clear standard for the agency in line with the provisions of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, as well as Indonesia's Law number 39 on Human Rights. Just Asia speaks to Kis Biantoro, Program Officer at the AHRC, for his views.
The problem is that there is no clear human rights standards to govern cyber and encryption in Indonesia. So we are very worried that there will be abuse of power and human rights violation committed by the new agency. We also have concern about the division of labor of the new agency, because there is also cyber unit within the police institution and also the National Intelligence Agency. Therefore, the government should seriously consider that the new agency will not duplicate the work of the police and also the National Intelligence Agency. In addition, next year Indonesia will have general election to select new president and also new parliament members. Therefore, we hope that the government will not misuse the cyber agency unit to attack or criminalize, quote-unquote, political opponent and also social media activists, where the social media activists are recently very active, critiques the government policy. Therefore, I would recommend that the government should develop effective oversight mechanism, either internal and also external oversight mechanism involving public and media. So the new agency will be more accountable and credible. The government should also develop complaint mechanism to anticipate misuse or abuse of power conducted by the new agency on cyber and encryption, and further guaranteeing that the new agency on cyber and encryption will not violate the right to freedom of expression and opinion and also internet freedom in Indonesia.
Next, in Nepal, prominent activist Dr. Govinda Kesi has been arrested for contempt of court on Monday evening. Prior to his arrest, he issued a press statement demanding the resignation of Chief Justice Gopal Parajuli for reinstating Dr. Sashi Sharma as the Dean of the Institute of Medicine, IOM. Dr. Kesi also accused Chief Justice Parajuli of being corrupt and a mafia don and undermining the judiciary. After his press statement, Dr. Kesi began his 14th hunger strike. Hundreds of people from various walks of life came out onto the streets on Tuesday against Dr. Kesi's detention. They chanted slogans calling for his immediate release. Dr. Kesi has risked his life repeatedly to push for much-needed reforms in medical education. The anti-corruption crusader was arrested by the Nepal police with what seems like a direct order from the court without information passed to the government. This suggests that the judiciary has overstepped its jurisdiction. In India, the country's Supreme Court, in a welcome move on Tuesday, modified its November 2016 order that required the national anthem to be played before a film is screened in cinema halls. The government had asked the court to review its earlier order on Monday, and on Tuesday, the court stated that it's now optional for cinema halls to play the national anthem before screenings. The November 2016 order had justifiably come under a lot of flack from various quarters for its imposition of patriotism and national honor on people. The Supreme Court, in its later order, has said that a 12-member inter-ministerial committee should be set up by the government to comprehensively look into whether the national anthem has to be played in cinema halls. Finally, the Urgent Appeals Weekly features 3 cases from Pakistan, Indonesia and Nepal. In Pakistan, a peasant leader and lawyer was found disappeared from jail after his bail was granted by Sessions Court. The intelligence agency had taken him from jail, and only after court proceedings were initiated regarding his disappearance did they lodge him in another jail. In Indonesia, a resident of Tali Abu Island was tortured to death in a military post. Mr. Lagode died with serious injuries in his back. Until now, the investigation is being conducted by the military police. In Nepal, a Dalit woman was beaten after she rejected a demand to have an illicit sexual relationship with a non-Dalit man. The woman has been receiving treatment at the local hospital for her injuries and is seeking justice. That is all for this episode of Just Asia. For more on these and other issues, please visit www.humanrights.asia or www.alrc.asia/justasia. Thank you for watching and see you next week.